In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte marched 600,000 men into Russia. It was the largest army Europe had ever assembled. He was going to finish the war in 6 weeks. He came back with fewer than 100,000. Most of them did not die in battle. They froze, they starved, they collapsed on roads that had turned to mud and then to ice. The man who controlled most of Europe destroyed his own empire because he could not stop pushing. Napoleon is not the exception. He is the pattern. Napoleon did not need to invade Russia. France already controlled most of continental Europe. His economy was strong. His military reputation was untouchable. He had won, but winning was not enough. Tsar Alexander had broken the trade blockade against Britain, and Napoleon could not tolerate defiance. Not because it threatened France. It threatened his image of total control. So he assembled the largest invasion force the world had ever seen and marched east. The Russians refused to fight. They burned their own crops. They destroyed their own villages. They retreated deeper and deeper into the country, dragging Napoleon further from his supply lines, further from safety, further from everything he had built. By the time he reached Moscow, the city was empty. The Russians had set it on fire. Napoleon sat in a burning capital, 600 miles from home, waiting for a surrender that never came. He had chased total victory so aggressively that he created total defeat. The retreat from Moscow killed more men than most wars in history, and it broke the myth that Napoleon could not be beaten. 2,000 years before Napoleon, Alexander of Macedon did something arguably more impressive. Starting at the age of 20, he conquered every major kingdom from Greece to the borders of India in just 13 years. No one had ever done anything like it. No one has since. By 30, Alexander controlled more territory than any single person in history. And then he stopped. Not because he chose to. His army refused to go further. They were exhausted. They wanted to go home. Alexander, for the first time in his life, had nothing left to conquer. What happened next is instructive. He did not build. He did not govern. He did not create systems that would outlast him. He drank. He raged. He executed old friends over imagined betrayals. At 32, he was dead, probably from alcohol, possibly from poison, certainly from a man who had defined himself entirely by the act of taking and had no idea what to do once there was nothing left to take. Alexander's empire collapsed within a decade of his death. His generals carved it into pieces. Everything he had fought for dissolved because he had never once asked what it was for. The pursuit consumed the purpose. Julius Caesar understood power better than almost anyone who has ever lived. He spent decades climbing the Roman political system. Military victories in Gaul, strategic alliances in the Senate, calculated risks that paid off one after another. By 49 BC, he had crossed the Rubicon and seized control of Rome itself. He reformed the calendar. He redistributed land to veterans. He centralized authority in ways that made the Republic more efficient than it had been in a century. But Caesar could not stop. He declared himself dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. Not for a year, not for a crisis, forever. Rome had tolerated temporary dictators for 5 centuries. A permanent one was something different. It was a man saying, "I will never let go." On the Ides of March, 44 BC, 23 senators stabbed Julius Caesar to death in the theatre of Pompeii. Several of them were men he had personally pardoned, men he trusted, men he considered friends. The tighter he gripped, the faster it slipped. Caesar's assassination did not save the Republic, it destroyed it. But it proved something the backwards law predicts perfectly. The moment you try to hold power permanently, you guarantee its loss. Alan Watts called it the law of reversed effort. The harder you try to hold water, the faster it runs through your fingers. The more desperately you chase sleep, the wider awake you become. The more aggressively you pursue happiness, the more miserable you are. The Taoists called it Wu Wei, effortless action, not laziness, not passivity. The understanding that forcing outcomes often produces the opposite of what you intend. The Stoics said the same thing in different words. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the largest empire on earth, wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He governed for 19 years. His empire held. He did not overreach. The Buddhists built an entire philosophy around it. Attachment, the desperate clinging to outcomes, is the root of suffering. Release the grip, and the suffering dissolves. 4 traditions, 4 continents, 4,000 years of independent discovery. They all arrived at the same conclusion. The harder you chase, the further it runs. Napoleon, Alexander, and Caesar were 3 of the most capable human beings who ever lived. They were not fools, they were not weak, they were brilliant, disciplined, and ruthless. And each one was destroyed by the same pattern. They could not stop. They could not release the grip. They defined themselves by conquest, and when conquest was no longer enough, they pushed harder and broke. The men who built things that lasted, Marcus Aurelius, Augustus, Ashoka, understood something the conquerors did not. There is a moment when the wisest thing you can do is stop, not because you are defeated, because you have already won. The backwards law is not about giving up. It is about recognizing that the thing you are chasing so desperately may already be behind you.